Do you believe that someone who has left can come back just to deliver one last message? This story begins with a pain that many mothers carry in silence, the loss of a child, a pain that does not go away with time, that cannot be explained in words, but that sometimes finds answers where it is least expected. She had already lost her son. Time had passed, the people around her went on with their routines, but inside her, the emptiness remained. The longing was alive, present in every detail of the house, in every deep silence. It was as if a part of her had stopped in time. But that night, something that seemed impossible happened, something that defied logic but made sense to the soul. It was there, between sleep and wakefulness, that she felt a presence. It was no ordinary dream. It was no imagination. It was as if time had bent to allow a reunion. And before her, he was, the son who had left. The same eyes, the same smile, but enveloped in a light that did not come from this world. And it was at that moment that everything changed. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever felt like someone who is gone is trying to talk to you? Maybe through a dream, a song, or an unexpected sign in the middle of the day. These spiritual encounters aren't just comforting. They can carry profound revelations, messages from the other side, and transform the way we view grief, life, and what comes next. This mother didn't just see her son. She heard something that finally gave meaning to the pain she felt. A plea, an explanation, a connection that transcended the barrier between worlds. And what she discovered in that moment, with tears in her eyes and a racing heart, wasn't just about her son. It was about her, about the mission she now needed to continue. Stay with me until the end, because what you will hear in this story may touch something that is dormant inside you. But first, I wanted to open a little space for something that makes all the difference here. And if you felt that this content had value, if it did you good or brought some meaning to something you were keeping inside, like the video, this helps YouTube understand that it is worth delivering this type of message to more people. And of course, if you feel like you want to continue on this journey with me, if this is a space where you feel understood and welcomed, subscribe to the channel. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because to understand the impact of that reunion, we need to go back in time a little. Back to before the pain, before the absence, before the silence. When he was still here, her son was everything. Ever since he was little, there was something different about the connection between them. It wasn't just a blood tie. It was something bigger, intense, almost spiritual. A kind of love that doesn't need an explanation, just presence. And presence was what he had the most. Always attentive, always smiling, always close by. He was the kind of person who seemed to bring light into the house. And maybe that's why, when he left, the darkness was even deeper. They shared simple rituals that only they understood. Little jokes, knowing glances, silent codes that only those who have a deep connection know. And when he was gone, the world lost its sound. Nothing had the same taste, the same meaning. The pain wasn't just emotional, it was physical. It was a weight on the chest, a lump in the throat that never completely went away. What hurt the most was not just the absence. It was the feeling that something was left unfinished. Words that were not said, hugs that she thought she had left for later, but later never came. And she began to live with this absence as if she were carrying an invisible suitcase everywhere. She tried to move on with her life, tried to smile, tried to talk to people, but inside, her soul was shattered. And even when they tried to console her with ready-made phrases, there was something that no one could reach. That sacred space between mother and son that remained open, suspended in time. For months, she tried to find meaning in the midst of chaos. And the worst part was that it seemed like the whole world was demanding haste. But grief is not in a hurry. The soul does not work according to a calendar. She began to search for answers. Not those that science offers, but those that the heart recognizes. And it was in this internal movement that she began to feel something different, as if that bond still existed, as if even without seeing it, it was there, in small details, in dreams, in memories that came out of nowhere, but brought a sense of real presence. Some people said it was all in her head, that it was her mind trying to deal with the trauma, but deep down, she knew. Because there are things that logic cannot explain, but the soul understands. And maybe the hidden truth behind the pain is precisely this, that true love does not end. It just changes shape. And when we begin to realize this, something inside us also begins to change. It was at this point that she began to see everything with different eyes. The pain was still there, but now there was a thread of light stitching together the emptiness. This thread grew stronger, and little by little, she began to feel that something was coming. She didn't know how or when, but she knew, as if a part of her was preparing for something bigger, a revelation, a reunion, an explanation that would finally give meaning to what seemed unfair, cruel, unacceptable. This silent intuition began to guide her steps, and when finally the unexpected happened, she wasn't surprised. Because in a way, she already knew that that moment would come. Because grief is not just longing. It is a silent scream that echoes inside us day after day, even when everything on the outside seems calm. And that was exactly how she felt. On the outside, she was learning to smile again. On the inside, she struggled to understand how to move on with that emptiness that no one could see. The people around her said that time healed everything, but time didn't heal. It just organized the pain in a different way. She didn't sleep well. Sometimes her body would get tired from trying to function normally, but her mind wouldn't stop. And whenever silence took over the house, something inside her would start to pulse. A presence, a memory, a living absence. The pain was constant, but there was something else. A subtle thread that she couldn't name, but that insisted on appearing at the most unexpected moments. A smell, a breeze, a song playing at exactly the right time. It all seemed too common to be a coincidence, but too strong to ignore. It was as if her son was somehow still nearby, as if he found small ways to make himself felt. And this feeling began to grow until it became almost a certainty. He was there. But how could she explain this to others? How could she put into words what only her heart could recognize? She began to keep these feelings to herself, not because she didn't want to share them, but because she was afraid that they wouldn't understand. And in truth, she herself didn't fully understand. It was as if she were being pulled into something beyond logic, a hidden truth that was gradually revealed through dreams, memories, and signs. On one of those sleepless nights, she allowed herself to close her eyes without resistance. Instead of fighting her thoughts, she let them come. And it was at that moment that everything changed. The atmosphere in the room became different, as if the air had gained weight and lightness at the same time. Her heart raced, but not out of fear. It was as if something was approaching, or someone, and then she saw it. He wasn't like before, but she recognized him in that same second. It was her son. He was standing before her, with that same sweet gaze, but with a light she had never seen before. There was no speech, just a silent exchange of souls. It was at that moment that the pain seemed to dissolve, not disappear, but change form, as if something in her had been touched in a place so deep that no words could reach it. And from that moment on, she began to understand that perhaps mourning was not a sentence, but a bridge, a passage, an invitation to a new form of relationship, where love continues, even without physical presence. That was not just longing. It was contact. It was a sign. It was a response. She began to realize that spirituality was not separate from pain. On the contrary, it was through spirituality that pain made sense, that the pieces, previously disconnected, began to fit together. The suffering did not disappear, but it transformed. It became a direction. It became a path. It became sensitivity. And this made her start to listen to life in a new way. The silence, which had previously screamed, now whispered. And in that whisper, she heard more than words. She heard presence. She heard love. She heard her son. And when her mind tried to rationalize, when doubts arose, she would simply close her eyes and return to that moment, because from that moment on, she knew there are things that we cannot see, but we feel. And what we feel with our hearts, time does not erase. The experience she had was not an illusion. It was a revelation, one that would completely change the way she would continue her journey from that moment on. Because what she experienced that morning was not just a dream. It was not just the result of longing or emotional exhaustion. It was something that broke the barrier between what is visible and what is felt. An encounter that cannot be explained with ordinary words, because it happened in a space between worlds, that place where time does not work like it does here, where love still pulses even without a body, where the spiritual touches the human in such a real way that it scares and comforts at the same time. It all began with a strange silence, a kind of pause that didn't come from outside, but from within. The room was dark, but she felt an invisible light approaching. It wasn't light in her eyes. It was light in her soul. A gentle warmth took over her chest, and for the first time in a long time she felt peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from good news or moments of relief, but a deep, ancient peace, as if she were being reminded of something her soul already knew. And then he appeared. She couldn't explain how. There was no opening of doors or a cinematic transition. He was simply there. Standing, calm, with the same look as before, but with a different energy, lighter, more aware, more whole. She wanted to run, hug him, tell him everything she had kept in during the days she cried alone, but she didn't need to. The silence between them spoke, and in that space, there was no guilt, fear, or pain, only raw love. He smiled, a smile she had known since the early days, but now it seemed to carry centuries of wisdom. And when he spoke, his voice didn't come through the air. It came from within. She heard each word as if it had been engraved in her heart before it was even spoken. He said he was fine, that he missed her, yes, but that there was no pain on the other side, that the love they had built was still the thread that held them together, and that now it was she who needed to live, not survive, live, with purpose, with dedication, with truth. Tears flowed, but not from sadness. It was as if everything finally made sense. The time for pain had its place, but now she needed to make room for something new, a transformation, a different mindset. What she felt there was not just comfort. It was a revelation, the kind of hidden truth that only reveals itself to those who have already gone through the dark night of the soul, and even so, decided to continue. In that moment, she realized something powerful. She wasn't the one being visited. She was the one being awakened. Because sometimes when someone we love leaves, they don't leave our lives. They just switch roles. They go from being by our side physically to walking with us on the inside. And when the pain has quieted enough, we realize they're still there. Not in the form of memories, but in the form of guidance. The impact of this encounter was so strong that she spent days trying to put it into words. But some experiences are not meant to be explained. They are meant to be lived, felt, and honored. And she understood that her mission, from then on, was not to prove what she had experienced. It was to live in such a true, sensitive way that this alone would be proof enough that that moment had happened. Because those who are touched by transcendence do not return the same. And she did not want to return the same. She wanted to move forward as someone carrying an invisible compass pointing to something greater. That was the turning point. From then on, she began to notice other things, other signs, small confirmations that seemed to say, you didn't imagine, you were chosen to know. And maybe, just maybe, what she experienced was also an invitation to see life with new eyes. Eyes that are not content with what is superficial, but seek the essence. Eyes that recognize that there is, yes, a dimension where love does not die, where the soul continues, where goodbye is just an interval. Because sometimes, a single sentence has the power to give new meaning to everything that seemed meaningless. And that's exactly what happened to her. He didn't say much. The words were few, but they carried a soft, almost sacred weight. He looked at her with a gentle firmness, as if he knew exactly what he had come there to do. And then, with his eyes shining and his voice coming from a place that was not physical, he said, "Now you understand." At that moment, something inside her broke, or maybe it aligned, because it wasn't just a sentence. It was a key, a confirmation that all that pain was not in vain, that there was a greater reason behind the absence, that the journey that seemed interrupted was actually just changing shape. She didn't need any further explanation. The meaning didn't come in long words or speeches. It came in a look, in an energy that touched the deepest part of her. Everything that was confusing, all the questions that never had an answer, suddenly seemed to find a place to rest. Not because she had understood everything with her mind, but because her heart had finally accepted it. And that was when the transformation began in earnest. It was no longer about surviving the pain. It was about moving through it with purpose. It was at that moment that she understood what so many people only realize after a long time. Sometimes the answers we seek come disguised as silence, or absence, or even pain. But when we are ready, they reveal themselves. And it doesn't take much. A gesture, a memory, a reunion, anything can become a portal. That's what she understood when she heard those words. That life had given her in that loss a new chance to live with more intention, to look at the invisible with more confidence, to trust in the behind-the-scenes of existence, even without understanding all the details. Because there, in that silent exchange, she realized that her son had not come back to say goodbye. He had come to show her that he had never left, that he had been by her side the whole time, guiding her every step, supporting her every cry, holding her every time the ground seemed to give way. And now he was only confirming what she was already beginning to feel, that her grief needed to be transformed into a legacy, that pain, if embraced truthfully, would become a beacon for other people, and that their story did not end, it just changed language. From that moment on, she began to live differently. It wasn't a visible change for everyone, but deep inside, her mindset was different. She stopped looking for signs like someone begging for answers and started opening up like someone who trusts. She began to realize that the most important things don't shout, they whisper. And the whisper of the soul can only be heard when the noise of the mind calms down. So she started to pay more attention to silence, to listening, to time, to the little things that before went unnoticed. And that's when other messages began to appear, not with words but with synchronicity, with encounters that seemed casual but brought exactly what she needed to hear, with feelings that came out of nowhere but came with the strength of revelations. It was as if her son somehow continued talking to her, but now through other means. And she knew that this was not imagination. It was continuity. It was love expanding. All of this gave her a new understanding of life. She realized that there are decisions we can only make after we have reached the depths of our pain, because it is there, in that dark and lonely space, that the soul finds its true strength. And when she heard, "Now you understand," it wasn't just about the past. It was about the future, too. It was a calling, an impulse to live with more presence, more courage, more dedication, to transform loss into purpose, silence into listening, and longing into mission. Because when she came back from that meeting, something inside her already knew. He hadn't left. Not really. And what happened in the following days only confirmed that feeling. It wasn't just emotion. It wasn't imagination. They were signs. Small, discreet, but too clear to be ignored. It was as if, after that silent message he left, he had started to make his presence felt in other ways. Ways that the soul recognizes before the mind even understands. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. A specific song playing on the radio when she got into the car. That song. The one they both listened to together, and that for a long time she avoided hearing because it hurt too much. But there it was, playing out of nowhere, at a low volume, as if to say, "I'm here." That same day, while organizing the bookshelf in the living room, a picture frame fell to the floor without explanation. It was his photo, the one she herself had put away months ago because she still couldn't look at it without crying. And when she looked at the floor, she realized that the glass hadn't broken, not a scratch. It was as if the moment had been carefully arranged so that she would notice, but without causing fear, without hurting, just communicating. She began to pay more attention, to notice what before would go unnoticed. And the more sensitive she became, the more signs seemed to appear. Sometimes it was a scent in the air, that childhood scent of the light cologne he wore. It would appear for a few seconds and disappear as if it had never been there. Other times it was an unexpected shiver, a soft presence behind her shoulders, exactly like she felt when he leaned against her to play. But the strongest thing was the feeling, a certainty that appeared at specific moments in which she felt invaded by a peace that came from nowhere, as if he were there, silently, supporting everything. These signs became companions, and she learned to respect them, to not demand logical explanation, to simply accept them. And each time this happened, something inside her grew stronger. The pain didn't go away, but it was no longer paralyzing. The longing was still strong, but now it was accompanied by a sense of continuity. It was as if he wanted to make sure every day that she knew, "You are not alone. I see you. I am here." These experiences awakened a new mindset in her. Before, everything needed logic, an answer, proof. Now she knew that there was a hidden truth that was not revealed with proof, but with presence. A truth that lived between the lines of life, in the details, behind the scenes. And that was where she began to live, in the space between the visible and the invisible, between what can be touched and what only the heart feels. The transformation she experienced was not one that everyone could see, but those who really knew her understood. The way she looked at time, the way she talked about things, the lightness with which she faced decisions, as if something greater was guiding her now. And in fact, it was, because each sign was an answer. Each sensation was a reminder. Each moment of spiritual presence was a confirmation that love transcends what death tries to interrupt. She understood that the journey was not about desperately searching for signs. It was about living sensitively and allowing the signs to come when the time was right. And when they did, she didn't rush to tell anyone, didn't post on social media, didn't try to convince anyone. She just closed her eyes, smiled inside, and gave thanks. Because she knew that, from somewhere where time is different, where things are not explained, but revealed, he was still there, in his own little way, saying, "I am still your son, and you are still my home." Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what she experienced is not an isolated case. There are thousands of reports around the world that describe very similar experiences. Subtle apparitions, inner voices, dreams so vivid that they cross the line between imagination and reality. For many people, these experiences are confirmation that the connection between the worlds, the physical and the spiritual, is not broken by death. And it is not only faith that says this. Spirituality, both in its oldest form and in its most recent interpretations, recognizes this type of encounter as something legitimate, authorized, and profoundly transformative. Spiritism, for example, calls these spiritual visits, moments when a spirit, through emotional affinity and energetic openness, is able to manifest itself, even if only for a short time, to convey a message or simply reinforce a bond of love. Allan Kardec, in his studies, already mentioned that these visits are not delusions. On the contrary, they are permitted manifestations, often driven by a reciprocal emotional need of the spirit and of the person left behind. The Christian faith, in many accounts, also recognizes that God allows certain sensory experiences to console, guide, or strengthen someone in moments of deep pain. Just remember how many stories of saints, mystics, and ordinary people report encounters with loved ones or even angels in moments of great fragility. These experiences are not modern inventions. They have been with humanity since the beginning of time. In indigenous traditions, in African cultures, in Eastern practices, They all speak of the presence of those who have passed away and still surround us. What changes is the way of interpretation, the vocabulary used, the symbolism. But the essence is the same. True love does not die. It just changes dimension. In her case, everything made sense now. The visit she had received, the signs that followed, the feeling of constant presence. None of it was the result of a tired mind or an unconscious desire to relive what had been lost. It was more than longing. It was active connection. It was life continuing in another form. And somehow, that brought more peace than any rational explanation could offer. But for this type of encounter to happen, it is not enough to just wait. There is an internal preparation, an emotional disposition, a spiritual openness. Spirituality talks about this. The frequency of our heart needs to be in tune with the love we seek. When we are surrendered, receptive, and silent within, the signs arrive more clearly. What seemed impossible begins to reveal itself in delicate details. And the soul, which previously screamed for answers, begins to listen with more humility and confidence. She understood that it wasn't about wanting to control what would happen. It was about trusting in what would present itself, because there is a divine wisdom that organizes encounters like this. Nothing happens by chance. Everything has a moment, a reason, an energy behind it. And when the right moment arrives, even the impossible happens naturally. It's as if the universe opens a small crack between the planes so that two souls can meet again, even if only for a moment. And this brief contact is enough to rekindle a strength, a clarity, a certainty that changes everything. Her experience is one among many, but what makes it special is the impact it had. Because after all that, she no longer needed external confirmation. What she had experienced was engraved in her eyes, in her gestures, in the way she began to talk about life and death. That became an inner truth, not imposed by books or doctrines, but received directly from the source, from the love that crossed worlds to reach her. That's why, when someone said that maybe it was just a dream, she would smile silently, because she knew what she had felt. She knew what had changed inside, and she knew that sooner or later, other people would also go through something similar. And when that happened, she wanted to be there, with an open mind and a willing heart, to listen, to welcome, and to say, "I felt it too, and you're not alone," because something in her really woke up. It wasn't just a change in her thinking, it was a change in the way she felt, perceived, and lived. She didn't go back to being who she was before, and honestly, she didn't want to. The woman who had gone through the pain and experienced that spiritual reunion was no longer the same woman who had once felt broken, lost, and on the verge of giving up on everything. There was now a new, silent strength in her that didn't scream, but sustained. A strength that didn't need to prove anything, just exist. And this strength came from the awareness that there is something greater guiding us, something that we can't always see, but can feel clearly when our hearts are ready. The transformation wasn't immediate. It wasn't magical. It was a journey, a slow reconstruction, like someone picking up pieces scattered throughout time and putting them back together in a new way. Only this time, she wasn't trying to go back to the way she was before. She was creating a new version of herself based on everything she had experienced, everything she had understood. Her decisions began to change. The way she looked at the world, the way she dealt with people, the way she reacted to her own feelings. Everything gained a new lens, not one of perfection, but of presence, of truth, of depth. She began to allow herself to feel more, listen more, and breathe more slowly. She began to realize that in the rush of everyday life, many important things go unnoticed. And now, after that experience, she no longer wanted to live on autopilot. She wanted to understand the details. She wanted to honor the signs. She wanted to welcome the invisible with the same seriousness with which she used to pay attention to the visible, because she understood that many of the answers she sought outside were inside her all along, just waiting for a little silence, a little courage, a little faith. This change in mindset was reflected in everything. She became lighter, more serene, but not in the sense of not feeling. She felt everything even more intensely. The difference was that now she understood the meaning behind emotions. She knew that even sadness had its place, that fear was just a messenger, that longing didn't need to be suffocated, but welcomed as part of the presence that still existed between her and her son. This transformed the way she related to her own story. From a victim of pain, she became the guardian of a purpose, and this purpose began to manifest itself in small gestures. She began to help others who were going through grief, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who knew what it was like to walk in the dark and still carry on. She wrote, spoke, and listened. Her words carried a serenity that came from experience. It was as if the experience she had lived had opened a new door within her, a door that could never close again, because it was now part of who she was. This transformation also had an impact on her spirituality. It was no longer about following a belief out of obligation, but out of connection, through direct experience, through truth felt in her skin. She began to live spirituality as a daily practice, not as a theory. She meditated more deeply. She listened to the silence more attentively. She prayed not only asking, but also giving thanks. And in each of these practices, she felt that there was something accompanying, protecting, guiding her, not because someone told her, but because she experienced it herself. And the most beautiful thing is that, over time, the pain took root. It became fertile soil for a new awareness. She understood that the loss that once seemed unfair carried an invitation, a call to look beyond, to understand the behind the scenes of existence, to recognize that life is not limited to what the eyes can see. And with this new perception, she found a peace that no longer depended on explanations. It depended only on presence. With this transformation, she didn't gain any guarantees, but she gained direction. She didn't eliminate her doubts, but she learned to walk with them. She didn't erase her longing, but she learned to live with it like someone living with a scar, a mark that no longer hurts like it used to, but that will never stop being part of history. And perhaps that is the most sacred thing of all, the ability that love has to continue shaping us, even after we say goodbye. Because after hearing all this, you might be asking yourself, what if this happened to me? Would I understand? Would I be able to feel it? And the truth is that, often, the signs are there, discreet, subtle, silent, but we are not ready to notice them. Spiritual sensitivity does not depend only on faith, but on presence, on listening, on a type of attention that goes beyond the eyes and ears. We need to learn to listen with our heart, to perceive with our soul, to trust what we feel, even when we cannot explain it. Being open is the first step. Open to believing that love is not limited to a body, that life does not end when the heart stops, that there is a dimension where true connections continue to be alive, active, and transformative. And this openness does not happen theoretically, it begins in practice, in the small choices of everyday life, in the way you silence your mind to hear what is beyond the noise, in the way you treat longing as something that hurts or as a channel that still connects. Some people expect great revelations, a voice in the middle of the night, a clear vision like in the movies. But signs don't always come with this impact. Sometimes they are fragments, a dream that seems more real than waking, an object that changes place without explanation, a scent that appears out of nowhere and brings back an exact memory, a thought that comes suddenly and fits as an answer. It is in these details that the invisible manifests itself, and to perceive this, you need to be whole, not in a rush to see something supernatural, but in the surrender of someone who knows that if it is meant to happen, it will happen, and the heart will know how to recognize it. There comes a point when searching becomes listening, when the anxiety of having an answer gives way to the confidence that everything will be revealed in due time, and that is when spirituality truly begins to flourish, when we stop forcing and start to flow, when you understand that not everything needs proof to be real, when you realize that some truths are revealed only to those who are willing to feel. This requires a change of mindset, openness of perception, Courage to let go of control and accept that the universe communicates in ways that logic cannot reach. The heart is the greatest translator of these signals, but it needs space to listen. That is why practices such as meditation, sincere prayer, and intentional silence are not just rituals. They are portals. They are ways of saying, I am here, available, ready to perceive what cannot be seen. Maybe you've experienced something and not realized it. A feeling that seemed like a coincidence. A moment of peace that came out of nowhere. A synchronicity so precise that, deep down, it made you doubt that it was just chance. And it's okay if you didn't understand it at the time. The important thing is that, now, maybe you'll look at it with different eyes. And this could be the beginning of a new journey. A journey in which you not only live, but also feel. In which you not only survive the absence, but learn to talk to it. Because being open means allowing yourself to be surprised. It means abandoning the idea that everything needs to make immediate sense. It means accepting that there is a hidden truth that only reveals itself to those who do not insist on controlling the script. And when you reach this state of openness, trust, and listening, something happens. The invisible begins to take shape. Signs come closer, and what once seemed impossible begins to seem natural. She understood this after everything she had experienced, that the pain had been just the beginning, that the reunion was just the turning point. But that the true miracle was this new way of existing, with her eyes turned inward, with her senses more awake, with a cleaner heart. And this state of openness became her way of honoring her son's presence, not by looking for signs, but by becoming a channel through which the signs could arrive. Because this story is not just about loss, it is about what comes next, about the transformation that happens when pain stops being a burden and becomes a portal, when suffering is no longer an end, but a starting point. She discovered this not all at once, but little by little, like someone who is uncovering the backstage of their own soul. And what seemed impossible, finding her son again, feeling his presence, understanding his message, turned out to be an invitation to a more meaningful life, a call to wake up, to see the world with different eyes, to live with more intention. This is one of those stories that carry a subtle but powerful force, because it doesn't intend to convince anyone. It simply shows what can happen when we choose to look within, when we allow ourselves to believe that there is something greater, something that goes beyond matter, time, and logic, something that pulses where true love never dies. And this something is not a distant, inaccessible place. It is closer than we imagine. It is within us. It is in what we feel when we put fear aside and make room to listen to our soul. The journey she lived is actually the journey that many are living now, each one with their own story, their own loss, their own search, but all with the same thirst for reunion. Reunion with those who are gone. Reunion with who you are. Reunion with what really matters. And when this reunion happens, when something touches us from the inside out, with a clarity that cannot be explained, what remains is gratitude. Because pain turns into direction, absence becomes presence, and the silence, which was once empty, begins to have a voice. She understood that she didn't need proof to believe, that what she had experienced, felt, and understood was enough, that the purpose of that experience was not to generate ready-made answers, but to open paths. And that is what remains. The possibility of making room to listen to the invisible, of appreciating the signs that seem small but carry an immense impact, of trusting that, even when we don't understand, there is something or someone guiding our steps. You may be wondering, but what if this is all in your head? And maybe that's a valid question, but what she learned is that some truths only make sense when they're felt. There's no point in expecting the whole world to understand or validate what your heart already knows. And when we get to that point, everything changes. The way we walk changes. The way we breathe changes. Even the way we look changes. Because now there's awareness. There's depth. There's something new pulsing inside. And perhaps that is the deepest purpose of it all, to take us back to our essence, to remind us that behind the masks and routines, we are all beings in search of meaning. And that, when love is true, it crosses dimensions to continue guiding, touching, teaching. Sometimes, the presence we need most is on the other side, and yet, closer than ever. This story may have begun with a loss, but it doesn't end there, because deep down, what was experienced there was a reunion with the presence of the sun, a reunion with the meaning of pain, a reunion with one's own soul. And this kind of reunion leaves marks, the kind that don't fade with time, because they weren't made to disappear. They were made to transform. If you've come this far, it's because something in this content really touched you. And that says a lot about your sensitivity, your search, and the space you have inside to perceive what goes beyond the visible. If this story brought you peace, clarity, or even that good silence of someone who feels understood, leave a like. It's a light-hearted way of showing that this connection was worth it. Take advantage and subscribe to the channel too. If this type of conversation makes sense to you, if you want to continue on this journey with me, with stories that welcome, provoke, and awaken, then this space is also yours. This is where we meet whenever we need to remember that we are not alone.